It's just absolutely wonderful to be here with you. Many of you I've met online directly, and others of you know more about me than I remember because you've been listening to my talks over the internet and so on. And so now we travel great distances through space and to just find ourselves still at home. I've been traveling now for 4 weeks, and every place I go, I'm looking around at my own friends and family. And of course, we all know that we're all the same, but it's really marvelous to experience it. And of course, the unity that comes to us now is a shared understanding of life and a desire to live more clearly and powerfully in the light. And these are times when all of us who feel that call really need to start thinking seriously about how we can serve and how we can attune ourselves ever more forcefully to the positive rays of energy that are always around us. And so tonight we're going to talk some, as much as we can, about these ideas in the hope that we can all come to a deeper understanding and a more profound resolution. And the second half of our evening this evening will be the opportunity for you to ask questions. So when I'm talking in the first half, what you don't like that I've said or don't understand that I've said or have an alternative point of view to what I've said, we can talk about it more interactively then. Many of you know Swami Kriyananda as the founder of Ananda, was a composer, and he always felt that the music of Ananda, he called it the lifeblood of what we're doing. We have ideas that please the mind, but the mind really becomes engaged when the heart becomes engaged. And nothing does that more directly or more effectively than music. So I've been traveling to various places for many years of my life, and I never go anywhere without a good musician. So in this case, I brought my friend Ambara with me from California. And he and I have been together in Ananda life for about 40 years, 35 years. So we've, when I met Gunther and Gabi again, I said, oh my, look what happens. Time passes and we're not young anymore, are we? But the spirit is always there. But this gentleman and I also have spent a lot of years following the same life, and he's going to share with you some music of Swamiji, and then I will begin to talk to you.
For those of you that do not speak English, but only German, which I'm hoping Tobias is going to translate me saying this. We will not translate the music, but I think you'll understand it anyway. There's joy in the heavens, a smile on the mountains, and melody sings everywhere. The flowers are all laughing to welcome the morning. Your soul is as free as the air. The flowers are all laughing to welcome the morning. Your soul is as free as the air. Leave home in the sunshine, dance through a meadow, or sit by a stream and just be. The lilt of the water will gather your worries and carry them down to the sea. Sing with me. The lilt of the water will gather your worries and carry them down to the sea. men hunger for freedom, but don't see their dungeon is only the thought that they're bound. Desires are their shackles, the hope that tomorrow the doorway to joy will be found. Desires are their shackles, the hope that tomorrow the doorway to joy will be found. There's joy all around us, why wait till tomorrow? We've only this moment to live. A heaven within us is ours for the finding, a freedom no riches can give. A heaven within us is ours for the finding, a freedom no riches can give. There's joy in the heavens, a smile on the mountains, and melody sings everywhere. The flowers are all laughing to welcome the morning, your soul is as free as the air. The flowers are all laughing to welcome the morning, your soul is as free as the air. The flowers are all laughing to welcome the morning, your soul is as free as the air. Okay, thank you. A song called What is Love? What is love? Is it only ours? Or does love whisper in the flowers? Surely we, children of this world, could not love by our own powers. What is joy? Is it just a dream? Or does joy laugh in every stream? Are the clouds mindless after all? Or is joy all nature's theme? God is dead, so men say. Can't they see all life's his play? Not a church binds him as its own, not a creed makes him fully known. Foolish we, if we limit him, every atom is his throne. What is love? Is it only ours? Or does love whisper in the flowers? Surely we, children of this world, could not love by our own powers. What is love? What is love? Is it love we touch in the flowers? Thank you.
The topic I've been asked to speak about tonight is how to find your higher purpose in life. It's a wonderful way to approach our lives, is to presume from the beginning that there is a higher purpose and that there are different dimensions of this life we're living, and that we have many choices in how we carry out our lives. Some of my very earliest memories have to do with this intense desire to understand life on a deeper level than it was being presented to me. I was born into a very intellectual family, a very good family. I feel very fortunate in the way I was raised. And my parents were extremely ethical, and they instilled in all three of us a strong moral core that none of us children have ever been able to violate, or if we have done so, at great cost to our conscience. But either my parents didn't reflect, or they didn't really have anything to offer me on the level that I was trying to understand. I remember being 10 years old and living in a suburb at that time in the state of Texas in the USA. I subsequently moved to California and forgot about Texas, but at the time I was there. And I was looking out the picture window of my parents' house to the house right over there. It's all very vivid in my mind. And there was a man there mowing his lawn. And this was long enough ago that he had just a little push mower that he was pushing across his lawn. And I vividly remember staring with great intensity at him, having this feeling that he was a thin facade over something much deeper, and that if I stared at him intently enough, somehow that facade would melt, and the words I would use now were the greater reality of who he was and what his house was and what his lawn and lawnmower were, would somehow just part. I had no philosophy that would ever have given me an idea like that, but somehow inside myself, I knew that the world I was looking at was not the whole story. I also remember being even younger than that. I was small enough, I was probably about 2 or 3. My little sister wasn't born yet, and my older brother, I don't know if the word torment is too big a word, but he was a very typical older brother. And he and I were both in the back seat of the car. We have older brothers in the room here. We have to give a moment for that to happen. Okay. He was a typical older brother, and he managed to do something that caused my mother in the front seat of the car to have to turn around and scold both of us. As I've never raised children, but I know it's efficient when you have more than one, not to spend a long time deciding who's really at fault. It's easier just to close the whole thing down. So my mother did that in a very appropriate motherly way, but that's what happened. And I was very sensitive, and I remember just being so stricken because my mother had to scold me. I preferred not to be scolded. But what I really remember was this awareness inside myself that the unhappiness I was feeling at being scolded was only on the very outside of who I was. And I curled up on the floor of the car. This was long before seat belts and safety restraint. Curled up on the floor, put my head down on the hump that was in the back seat of cars then, floor, and I started listening to the sound of the tires on the highway. Many years later, when I took up yoga, I found out about the Om sound, the continuous sound of the universe. And so I put my ear on the tires and started feeling this, the sound and the rhythm. And I consciously remember knowing if I went deep enough inside myself, I would find the place where the fact that my mother had scolded me wouldn't matter to me anymore. And I was not, I think they call it dissociating, which is the way children especially can deal with trauma. Wasn't that at all. It was the exact opposite. That there was a reality so much bigger, even than my being a little child, what to speak of having been scolded. So it was this, what I was doing is something that many years later I've come to understand is essentially the process of meditation, essentially the process of discovering a bigger reality within ourselves. I've, since then, for many years, I've had this thought in my mind that it's not possible in this world to live without difficulty. And even if our own lives are fortunate, all around us we see individuals who struggle, sometimes struggling in truly in unsolvable ways. And other people's suffering in many ways is sometimes harder for us to take than our own. And it isn't possible to save everyone in the world. And it isn't possible sometimes even the people that we love the most to take their struggles away. But what I've seen is that a great deal of success and happiness in life is just seeing things in proper proportion. And I didn't have this image then, but I know now what I was thinking. When my mother scolded me, her scolding became my whole reality. And it was as if the palms of my hands were my mother's scolding, and I put them right up to my eyes, and there was no reality except the pain that I felt from having been a bad girl and having prompted her to say that. I didn't think I was innocent, by the way, even though my brother started it. But I wasn't innocent. But once you have something happen and you put your hands over your eyes, even if your eyes are wide open, your whole reality is defined by what you can only see like this. And what I've come to understand is that it's not as if these challenges ever go away, but if you put your hands in front of you, when I'm here, I can't see any of you. You all disappear. When I put my hands here, it's still existing in exactly the same size, but it's changed proportion. And now it fits very comfortably into this greater reality that we're all living. And so I have come to understand, when I was 22 years old, I had the great good fortune to meet Swami Kriyananda, who was now a direct disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda, author of Autobiography of a Yogi. These are Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi is one of the still a best-selling spiritual book that influences all over the world, millions of souls. Yogananda left his body in 1952. He was from India, but his destiny was to spend his life in the West. And he was one of the first great Indian teachers who came to the USA and started this spiritual revolution. The USA is a good place to start things because we have no history, we have no traditions. And as Yogananda himself said, in India, when he would talk to people about the possibility of self-realization, of God realization, they understand what that means, and they know that it's not that easy to do. So they say, oh, yes, yes, but if not in this lifetime, in some future lifetime, I have so much karma to work out. All this knowledge causes them to be less optimistic. Yogananda said he came to America, to Los Angeles, California, no less, and he could say to Americans, you can realize God. And they would say, we would say, sure, we can do it. You all know that's the best and the worst of the country I come from. Sure, we can do it. But in this case, it helped. But he was there and he taught, and then he published Autobiography of a Yogi. These great masters, their lives are like a pulse that just starts pulsing. And it takes often centuries before the power of what they launch really begins to be seen. And now, almost, 100 years since the autobiography was published, is that right? 75 years. You know, it's in all these different languages. Well, Swami Kriyananda was 22 in 1948, and autobiography had been published for 2 years, and he read it, and he dropped everything and went to California to become a disciple, which was fortunate because Yogananda died less than 4 years later. But when I was 22, Swami Kriyananda came right to the town where I was living, which was where I presently live, which is Palo Alto, California, and he came and gave a talk at Stanford University. I had been a student at Stanford, but I found that my professors had great knowledge, but they did not have the wisdom that I was seeking. I was looking for a profound understanding of the meaning of life, and they could teach me all kinds of very interesting and in some cases useful information. But I did not find there the kind of understanding of what causes suffering and what brings happiness. And that to me seemed like the only question worth answering. So after 1 year of college, much to my parents' dismay, I left college and never returned. And soon after that, I walked into a room where Swami Kriyananda was speaking. It was a room about as big as this. I had come there with people who were interested in hearing him talk, but not that interested. So in their company, we had sat as far away from the Swami as we possibly could and still be in the room, which turned out to be quite dramatic for me. It was bleachers of all things, so we were looking down on him. Swami Kriyananda started speaking. And actually, I have to say this first. He walked into the room. Before he spoke, and I'd never seen him before, I'd come on the recommendation of a friend. He walked into the room, and in some way that I could never explain, I was aware that I was in the presence of something I had never seen before. And of course, it was a someone, but it was the something that really struck me. And what I felt was, we're all in this room together, and we all have different kinds of energy. And we all, these days, we talk about energy fields and magnetism and the auras that people have and so on like that. But all of us are of a certain size, you know. But Swamiji walked into the room and he filled the room before he spoke. And I had this feeling that if I'd been 100 yards outside the room, because there was no confining boundary around him. We all have the confining boundary of the physical body we live in, but there was this unfettered energy that came from him. And when he began to speak, even though I was as far away from him as my reluctant friends could take me, I felt like he was standing right there talking to me. It just like his vibration, these are words you have to use, his vibration just, again, the same unlimited energy field. I don't remember a thing he said. It just, none of it stayed in my head. But after he finished, I thought, oh, he's so intelligent. He's the most intelligent man I've ever met. Intelligence It's kind of my hobby. It's just something I always enjoy. I exercise it and I enjoy it. It's not the highest value. They're higher values, but it entertains me. And so it was lovely because he was also intelligent. Because by the end of that session, I realized I'd found what I'd been looking for. Because this also was the intuition that came to me. I have to say, this was not my normal way of doing things, to just have a flash and have a thought like that. These were very different experiences. But I just said, he has what I want. And I wasn't even sure what it was. But what I came to understand is, he understands what causes suffering. He knows what brings lasting happiness. Bear in mind, we tend to think of happiness as ease and pleasure. That's how the ego wants to have life go. We think something is good if it's easy and pleasurable, and when we say bad, it's because it's challenging, and the bigger it is beyond our capacity to do things, the worse we think it is, like that. The problem is that we operate on many different levels, and there's another part of us which is our superconscious self. You could call it the soul, the spirit. The words are less important than the feeling that we have, that we operate on multiple dimensions at the same time. And there's a part of us that aspires to be bigger and to be more than we are. And that part of us, we may try to silence it, but it's a persistent, unrelenting determination that sooner or later, and you have to put reincarnation in here to make it really work, in this lifetime or in some lifetime, it has to be responded to. But it's not a question of all or nothing. It's just wherever we're standing, there's a desire within us to become more than we already are. And what happens to us when we're challenged is we either shrink in fear or we gather ourselves and face into that and try to understand on a deeper level, because challenge is usually associated with something we call suffering. You know, I lose something I want, I don't get what I thought I would get. Death or disease or old age, the threefold suffering the Buddha talks about, old age, disease, and death come to us, or we get everything that we want, and then we discover that we're still not completely satisfied. Swami Kriyananda says, we learn a great deal from having our desires thwarted, and often life and circumstance thwart our desires. All of us undoubtedly have had disappointments on one level or another. And we learn from being disappointed. We learn compassion. We learn patience. We learn what it feels like to suffer, and we become less inclined to impose suffering on others. If we're honest about our experience, we realize that sometimes the hardest things that happen to us end up teaching us the most. It's exceedingly annoying, very, very annoying. But nonetheless, it turns out to be largely true, isn't it? So we learn from being thwarted. But interestingly, and I've pondered this for a long time, Swami Kriyananda says, we learn more from having our desires fulfilled. Because if we desire something that doesn't come to us, a part of us always holds the thought, I would be happier if I had it. And in fact, it's that desire for what we didn't get that moves us to reincarnate again and again. we keep coming back and trying to make it all work out. And when we finally have what we want, whether it's human love, whether it's a home of our own, a family that we can cherish, money, success, whatever you might call it, what happens to us then is we realize this is wonderful. This is a beautiful experience, or at least it can be, a right understanding of the real teaching of self-realization and of yoga is to understand that there's nothing awful about this world. It just isn't enough. And so when we really achieve what we want, what often happens is, but I still have parts of me that feel unfulfilled. And this was my difficulty as a young person, because I came from a family with sufficient resources and sufficient understanding of the world. And I was born with the ability to do school very well. I couldn't do anything else very well, but I did school very well. And if you can do school well, you sort of have an open door. So all of those things were open to me. But I had just the strangest feeling about it all. I didn't know anything about reincarnation, which I have subsequently come to feel makes everything make a lot more sense. If you're not persuaded of it, you don't have to take it to understand what I'm saying, but everything makes more sense. But I had this feeling, even when I was quite young, that when I got to the end of my life, on any of the paths that were open to me, I could be a doctor, I could be a professor, I could be a lawyer. I was a little more interested in being a mother with multiple children, although I never did that. That was sort of the one I thought I might find would be okay. But I could sort of see myself, well, where I am now, which is closer to the end than to the beginning, and I could feel that it still wouldn't be enough. And no one around me could understand that. That's why I dropped out of college. I just couldn't get anybody to talk to me about that. And then Swami Kriyananda walked into the room. And I could tell he was asking and answering the questions that mattered to me. So at the age of 22, basically, that was it. And I made that decision so fast that you would have thought it would have been silly, except it's been 50 years, and it's worked out pretty well, I'm here standing with all of you, which is a lot of fun for me, so at least in that respect, it's good. But the basic premise that Swamiji presented to me was the basic premise of the fundamental teachings of India, which is called Sanatana Dharma, which is not Hinduism. Hinduism is a word that was imposed by the British because they lived by the Indus River, and they were clearly not British, so they had to give them some other name. So they started calling them Hindus. But Sanatana Dharma, a Sanskrit phrase, has two meanings, both of which are lovely. One is eternal religion, but religion is a little confusing word. The definition I like better is that which is. And it was the great sages staring out the window at the man mowing his lawn, but actually having the ability to part the veil a little bit, and then being able to teach others how to part that veil. And the fundamental premise of Sanatana Dharma, that which is that we are divine in our nature, that our higher reality is our true reality, and the purpose of incarnating into a human body is to realize that. And the word self-realization, which is what Yogananda called his teachings when he came to the West, he just pulled English words out and used those words, has a marvelous implication in the word realization. Because when you realize something, You don't create it or acquire it or earn it. You just suddenly know something. And it implies that you become aware of something that was always there, but, well, there's the word, you didn't realize it. And you recognize it as always been part of you. So the very phrase self-realization, and in the English language you put a capital S on that word, because the word self can mean the limited reality, or it can mean the unlimited reality. So we constantly have a self that we walk around all the time, talking about and talking with and relating to each other and being ourselves. I was walking to get here we walked from the hotel where we were staying. I have a terrible sense of geography, so I tried to orient myself by the shops that I was looking at. I say to people, I almost always know what I think. I usually know what I feel. I rarely know where I am. I can name the city, but please don't send me out to find the hotel by myself, or I will never return. But we were walking down one of those malls, and there was some big, I don't know, you might know which store it is, and the words were all in English. These models, the first one said something like, I am my fragrance. I thought it was perfume. It wasn't that they had smelly bodies. I am my fragrance. And the other one told us to be bold and to be yourself. And then they were illustrated with these models who, were trying to be bold and to be themselves. And it was just like, oh, please, give me a break. I mean, we live with all of this, but we don't realize how we are constantly being, having our limitations reinforced instead of being inspired to break out of those limitations and really become free of all that we're afraid of, that we cling to. And so the simple theme that we're talking about, how to discover your own higher purpose. I know it is also popular these days to, let me think, the more expanded ideas become popularized, the more they get absorbed into the popular culture and things get a little bit confused. When I went into a grocery store near where I live many years ago, there were a book of paperbacks on the shelves. And when I first started with yoga, meditation, karma, reincarnation, Indian gurus, self-realization, it was a real narrow niche. In California, where I live now, not everybody meditates, but everybody knows they ought to. And so if they don't, they feel guilty about doing it, which is, the beginning of change. And so, but this was many years ago, and I see this novel, and it's one of these Harlequin romance books where, there's always this tortured love affair, and then finally they kiss. And then after they kiss, then everything happens after that. They're very clean and bright. They're not pornographic at all. But anyway, so on the cover, there's this woman, and she's looking very conflicted. And then there's two male figures on this side. It turns out like this one was Richard and this one was Herbert or something like that. And there's shadowy figures behind there, and they look very different one from another. And then the advertising says, was it Mildred's karma to be with Robert? Or would her karma take her to Herbert? And I thought, wow, we've become mainstream at this point. But it's like all of these thoughts are whirling around. We're supposed to be ourselves. We're supposed to be strong. But the thing is, on any day, we're dozens of different people, and all of them could be called I. Swamiji said, We tend to think of our spiritual progress as like a long-distance runner bravely going through the 26 miles or whatever it is of that run. But in fact, he said, we're much more like a whole football team individually, with all the different players. You know, the one who's only on the team because his father owns the team, right? And then the one who scores all the goals and wins everything for you. And just on any particular day, we're just any one of those, isn't it? And so it's not so easy to navigate through this. And it's very popular these days that when we think of our, living from a higher reality, we tend to take that into the ego. And we want to have, now, I need to have a special destiny. I have to have, in letters of gold across the sky, telling me who I'm supposed to be. And unfortunately, and I hate to break the news to you, most of us do not have a world-changing karma, okay? It's just, we're here because we have lots of different lessons to learn. And excellence and achievement is part of what we're supposed to learn. Not so much so that we can shine in the world, but because in order to achieve success in this world, we have to fight against our limitations. We have to get the ball in the hand of the players who can actually carry it, and we have to get the rest of those guys on the bench, and just get them out of the way. But they're always competing within us. And excellence has merit not only for what we can manifest, but also for who we become in the process of trying to achieve it. And this is a more subtle understanding, like this world may be only a veil over a deeper reality, but the deeper reality that we're working with at all times is our own potential. And fulfilling that potential is not, as I'm saying, only how it manifests. It's who we become in doing it. There's a wonderful death and return story that, for those of you who've heard other talks that I've given, I often refer to it, but it's so perfect. There's a man named Dr. George Ritchie. He was an American man who lived in the southern part of the United States. And he was a soldier in World War II. He was 21 years old. He'd never been in battle, and that wasn't how he died. He died of the Spanish flu in Texas, actually, at a huge army base. He died. He went into that world that so many people are writing about now, when your body dies. He was there for a while, and he came back. He was deeply devoted to Jesus, and so it was Jesus who greeted him. And Jesus asked him only one question, and that question was, how much have you loved? And he said, I'm just 21 years old. I haven't had much chance to do anything. Jesus was not convinced. Jesus just looked at him calmly and said, how much have you loved? And it was a question that demanded an honest answer, because Dr. Ritchie said they were standing in a 360-degree movie theater of some sort, in which every incident of his 21 years was happening all around him. And in that altered state, Dr. Ritchie could see that he hadn't loved very much at all. And all his selfishness, all his inconsideration for people around him, it was just all on the walls around him. And he said the only incident that he wasn't really mortified about was that he'd become an Eagle Scout in the Boy Scouting system. And he said he kind of tried to make his little body as big as he could and point to the Eagle Scout issue. This is to Jesus himself. He's pointing to the Eagle Scout like this, trying to block Jesus' view of a lot of the other things that he didn't want him to see. And he said, As soon as he did that, by telepathic means, he felt Jesus speaking to him, Jesus responding. And he spoke with a southern accent. And he called Jesus the Savior. The Savior. He said, the Savior was amused. That's how he put it. The Savior was amused. Jesus Christ was amused because this young man was thinking that he could hide something, you know? And so at that moment, though, what happened was he felt, what did he feel? He felt the love that was there for him. And this isn't just about, our Lord Jesus Christ. This is about the divine reality. He just felt the love that was there. And even though he didn't have much to be proud of, Jesus didn't care. He was just there to help him. Help him understand, the answer to our question tonight. What is your higher purpose? How do you find our higher purpose? Everything has to be measured, I think, against the deeper realities of the life we're living, which is, if you stare hard enough at it, it parts and it shows us something else. And all the things that we gather and accumulate and want to hold on to, in the end, they all just go away. How much have we loved? Now, that love doesn't have to just be human to human with romance and children and family. Love is a force of the universe that just comes through us. We love the work we do. We love the art that we create. We love the gardens that we grow. We love standing out on a beautiful meadow and just looking at the extraordinary green. But when you want to play it, of the team, who has the ball? Is it the crabby, nobody treats me right, somebody owes me an apology, part of ourselves that we're going to live from? Or is it that part of ourselves that opens out and gives? Because the other side of how much have you loved is how much have you given? What are we thinking and what are we doing with our lives? And nowadays, as I said very briefly at the beginning, the world is really polarizing. And these are serious times. Certainly in my short life, the country that I live in the USA, is just doing things I've never known it to do before. And who knows where it's going? In every country in the world, you can see it. And the difference is, are we taking the energy to get what we can and make ourselves as powerful as we can? Or are we taking the energy that seems to be coming into our world right now and using it to love more courageously, more heroically, to take care of our brothers and sisters and the planet that we live on? And one of the secrets that we all have to really tune into now is that, what we see in the material world is the last stage of creation. I don't mean the end times. That's not what I meant to say by that. But if we think about how anything is created, it goes through 3 levels. First, there's the idea. This building we're in, somebody had the idea that they could put a building here. And then whoever had the idea started putting energy into that idea, raising the money, drawing the plans, getting the builders. And all of that had to have sufficient power that this could finally be manifested. And if at any stage there hadn't been sufficient power in the idea of it and the energy put behind it, we wouldn't be sitting here. We might be sitting in another building, but not this one. So we look at the way the world is now, but we're seeing the final expression of idea, energy, manifestation. So we can push against the manifestation if we want to. We can move the chairs, we can push the automobiles, we can lift the rocks. But much more importantly are the ideas that we're living by and the energy that we're putting into those ideas. Because as I was saying about meditation, I've been involved in the movement that I'm part of, which is meditation and the idea of a greater reality of which we are all a part, and the changing of yourself to be able to live by the ideals that you believe in. And I've watched from being almost none of us to this, well, to them to be able to advertise a romance with the word karma, you know, in the Western world. And vegetarianism and veganism and earth changes and permaculture, and I mean, I can just go on and on and on. How did that happen? Well, people had the ideas, then they put energy into it, and then all of a sudden the world's going in a new direction. And at this time, you know, the forces of light are struggling pretty hard against the forces of shadow. But light is always more powerful than shadow. Shadow only blocks the light. It cannot extinguish it. So the more powerfully, and I think right now, the higher purpose for which all of us who are living in these times was born for, was to be instruments of that light. To commit ourselves to that possibility, to put energy into it so that when we die, if Jesus or whoever meets us and asks how much have we loved, we can say, as much as I could, sir. As much as I could. We don't have to be more than we are, but whatever little we have, it will change you, and I believe in time, it will shift this whole planet. Thank you. God bless you.